first of all? I read your bio, but how did you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you decide on a career in real estate?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? I don't think many people wake up as a kid and dream of being a real estate agent. It's just kind of something you fall into as you become an adult. So I was working at an advertising agency out in central Auckland as an intern and was offered a position there. But as I was doing my internship, I didn't feel like it was the right place for me. And I think it was just the limited feeling of growth. Whether I was right or wrong, I just felt like it was a little bit, how should I say, hindering what I probably had envisioned to do. And then I came across, coincidentally, the owner of the North franchise here for Sotheby's, who now owns Sotheby's, but at that point in time didn't, but was starting up his own real estate brand up in Auckland. And yeah, basically just went from there. So I started in the garage of his house, starting real estate, team of two, tackling the Auckland market. So I was fresh into the industry. He'd been in about a decade, but he was coming from down South Island. That's how I fell into it. And I loved it. And I think not just from the sales perspective, but just from the growth aspect of seeing a business kind of start from grassroots and move onwards.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what is the real estate market like in Auckland these days? What's going on?
Yeah, so it is heating up, which is great. Now I'll be interested to hear how your end of the market has been doing as well. But what we've been experiencing is a bit of a in the market over the last 2 years. We had basically hyperinflation of prices going up leading into the end of 2021. And that was obviously due to the COVID pandemic and our government's ability to try to re-stimulate the economy based on the fact that we were in some pretty heavy lockdowns prior. So for the year 2021, to put it in perspective, the market went up 20% for that single calendar year in real estate.
That's incredible.
It's incredible, especially when you take into consideration that the pricing over here was already about $1 million average. So it was actually a great time to be in real estate. However, obviously there was repercussions to that because you can't have inflation at that level. Our Reserve Bank basically put the whole thing and threw up what we call the official cash rate here, which is obviously the rate at which the banks can borrow money. And so money pretty much came to an end in lending, or it became a lot more difficult. And subsequent to that, the market started to drop. We've been experiencing a drop for the last 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
And we're only just coming right. So I've started to feel it more around October, where we had a pretty big interest rate drop, and now things are coming back. So Auckland, I would tell you, is heating up. There are buyers back in the market, lots of willing sellers, so a bit of a supply issue, but it's balancing out. Yeah, that's what I would say. And I'd say it's most popular in the family home market and underneath that. So anything you're talking about 1.5 million under, that's really taking off. And that money kind of trickles forwards into the market. So I'm expecting that to change in the new year.
Okay. So to answer your question, it's been pretty much the same over here as well, right? We had the stimulus, certain properties in Dallas, I'd say went up probably 40%, 50% in a year. Wow. Yeah, the prices have pretty much tapered off as far as going up that fast, but the pricing has still pretty much held. The number of transactions has come down quite a bit from the 2021, 22 market. But one of the questions I've been really dying to ask, how can a U.S. citizen buy property in New Zealand? Can I go and buy a house in New Zealand? Because I did a little bit of research and it looks like it might be a little bit difficult.
Yeah, look, technically there is abilities for U.S. citizens to buy in, but you are right, it is difficult. 3 ways in which you can buy property in New Zealand if you are not a New Zealand citizen. The first one is overseas investment offerings. So as an example, we have a new build development out in a town very close to Auckland City Central called Amaya. So for that, you can technically buy, but you must reach certain criteria as a purchaser. So there's rules that you have to abide by to buy into there. And the developer of that development also has to abide by certain criteria. The examples of that is you can't sell more than 60% of that development to overseas investors. So if 60% has been sold that's the cap. So if it's been up to 60%, that is done. You can no longer sell to any more overseas investors. You have to buy it before completion is another obligation for the developer. So once the property is built and is legal standing with their own individual titles or records, then no longer can you purchase internationally. It has to be while it's under construction. And an example for the purchaser is you can't occupy the apartment yourself unless you have a residence stamp or a one home to live consent, which is what we run off, which I can explain because that's the next step in terms of being able to purchase property in New Zealand.
Okay.
So if you're looking to buy overseas investment act exempted properties and you're looking just to buy in the general market in Auckland, you can only really do that if you have ordinarily resident status. That's the term.
Okay.
And so that means you have to have a resident visa as such. No other visa will work. So your work visa, student visa, work to residence, working holiday or visitor, none of those allow you to purchase into New Zealand market. You have to take the pathways to become a resident. And once you are a resident, you can then purchase. But it doesn't just stop there. So if you are a resident, you then need to be able to spend half of a calendar year in New Zealand and have lived in New Zealand for at least 12 months, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so this is second. The third one is for business purposes. If you can provide a high amount of economic benefit to New Zealand, you can also purchase property in New Zealand. But that's quite technical. And for that, you'd have to probably, I'd say, speak with a lawyer.
Okay. Okay. So that would be if a business owner wants to basically move their business to New Zealand, then maybe they could buy it without the other pathways.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. You still always will need to get a overseas investment exemption done, but you'll have to talk to your lawyer, talk to immigration, talk to the government, and be able to facilitate that. So there are means, yes, you can technically, in that sense, bring your business over and purchase in New Zealand. That is correct, but they're very high figures, and it has to be of a high economic benefit. So yeah.
Okay. So what is the rental market like in your area? Because foreigners can rent. Is there, and then as far as investing, I guess it's difficult, but what are you seeing as far as like returns on investment, as far as landlords and that kind of situation?
Great. Yeah, great. It's a pretty strong rental market at the moment. So rental prices are increasing quite a bit. I think we've seen over the last calendar year from May of this year to year, it increased by 6.9%, which is actually in line with what the expectations are for the property market to increase by in terms of sale price. That's quite good. There's no shortage of tenants at the moment looking. Now, I sell primarily in Auckland, so I can tell you what happens in Auckland. It's a high demand market for it. It's quite liquid, if that's a word to use for it. So properties come in and out, and it's competitive, which is good. Now, the rental yield side of things is interesting, actually. So the rental yield will depend on where you buy in the country traditionally. So if you were looking to buy in Auckland, a rental yield of about 5% is pretty good.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah, it's very good. However, there's areas in New Zealand where you can get rental yields up to 10%. So
Are those more rural? Is that more rural or small town, or where would you?
It's Southland. So South Island, you'll tend to find those. It's quite interesting. So when I was looking at the numbers, and I've done graphs myself, the further you get from Auckland in terms of regions, and we call them regions in terms of different categories of our country, the further you come from Auckland, the less the price, but the higher the rental yield. So rents are pretty consistent across the country, or they do not taper off as much as property prices do.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. But there's a two-pronged thing here. So if you are looking to buy in Auckland, there's a very high chance you'll have capital growth. And in fact, people will buy properties not so much for the rental investment that will keep the banks at bay, but more so to bank on the capital growth. We've had pretty good capital growth over the country, and even better in Auckland for many years. I think the average rate of increase year on year is about 7% since early 1990s.
So, oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah, and as of more recently, it's been about 10% per year, as of 10, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, that's very interesting. So what trends or developments in the market right now are you most excited for going into 2025 and beyond?
So I traditionally work lifestyle and country real estate around the kind of the fringes of Auckland.
I saw some listings in, is it Dairy Flats?
Yeah, so Dairy Flat is a town, I would say, about 20 minutes from the city on a good day. So pretty close. It is city fringe. In fact, the next closest rural area would be Albany Heights, Red Vale and Coastal, and that brink is literally on Albany, which is what we call completely residential. So they're your smaller sections. So the land I sell is more around your acreage and hectareage. So that's what we usually sell. Now, what I'm excited about personally is I believe the government currently got in place is looking to open up what we call green zone developments. So hopefully that will allow and facilitate more developments in the area that I'm selling. So be able to develop rural and turn it residential if feasible. Obviously, there's a few things in here. So it needs to fit the criteria for environmental aspects and also functionality. But at the moment, we're somewhat locked as such, and we're reliant on local governments to be able to give us the okay whether or not it's ready. But it looks, and this is what I've heard through the grapevine, there may be provisions to be able to develop those areas under consent and request to the council, and it's a lot more accessible and easier to do. That's what I'm excited about. Apart from my own personal area, it'd be the growing sentiment in the market and the growing economy. Things are getting a lot better. Boots on the ground, be talking to a lot of business owners and people in New Zealand. People are very optimistic for 2025, and businesses thrive here in New Zealand. It has a direct correlation to property here, and that's because a lot of money in New Zealand is actually tied up in property. I think about 57% of all household wealth is tied up in property.
Okay, so I have just a couple more questions. So what is the price per, is it hectare? What kind of price are you seeing for just pure land?
And so it's interesting. In my area, about $100 per square meter. So for 1 hectare of land, 10,000 square meters, you're looking at about $1 million. That's traditionally what it was going for. But I will mention my area is being flagged for future urbanization. And so what that is in particular is the local government has on zoning on our property in terms of limitations and its category for what its potential future and current use is. And so if you look at the maps that the government will offer you, it's a nice bright yellow color, almost like a highlighter. And current owners cannot subdivide, split off their land or do anything because there is anticipation in a pretty long time scale, anywhere between 5 to 30 years. And that is the plan for this to be urbanized into a mixture of business and commercial and residential land. So people that are buying my land traditionally are holding it to be able to develop in the future. That's their intentions. Sell it for a profit to a developer. Outside of my area, that's not future. You're looking at country. It really will depend on the suburbs that you buy in. It's very suburb dependent here. And there might only just be a 5 or 10 minute drive across. But yeah, land can vary from that typical $1 million a hectare, which is the standard going rate for all the areas. If you're buying investment land, 10 hectares, maybe 10 million, which is quite high. But however, you were to buy somewhere, say Waitoki, which is an out area just outside of Dairy Flat, a bit further out of the city, but only about 5 minutes. If you were to buy 10 hectares there, you could be looking at potentially, and it depends on the quality and use of the land, you could be looking at around 3 million. So it really does depend.
Gotcha. So how can listeners get in touch with you if they're interested in getting into New Zealand real estate? I know that most Americans won't really be able right now. It's difficult for Americans to get over there and buy their dream home next to Hobbiton or Auckland.
Yeah. Hey, look, there's provisions to allow it, and keep your eyes open. There's always developments in place that allow for overseas investors to buy in. To contact me, look, you just email me, matt.wafer@nzsur.com. And you can contact me on my phone, available 7 days a week. It's +64215011337. And look, if you are looking to understand, do you fit the category? It's best to talk to a local mortgage broker here in New Zealand also. And I would talk to an independent broker, maybe outside of the major banks. If you chat with me, we'll be able to put you in the right direction. And what's typical in New Zealand is if you're buying, brokerage advice, including myself, is typically free for the buyer because we are paid for by the vendor. So for me, the seller, and for the mortgage broker, the bank. Okay.
Well, that's great. Hey, thank you so much for taking time out of your morning to speak with me. It was great to meet you, and I hope we can remain in touch.
Yeah, likewise. Cheers.
Awesome. All right. Hey, thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.